Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Good to be with you.
So, a profile came out on you earlier this year, and it was headlined, "Why are you so angry?" Do you consider yourself an angry person?
No, and actually that is a big misconception of my campaign. A lot of the people with loud voices in this country, the media, the establishment, assume that anybody who's looking for change is angry. And I had these massive rallies across the country as part of my leadership campaign. 90,000 people RSVP'd to come to them. And I probably shook hands with about 30,000 of them because my policy is to shake hands with every single person who wants to meet me at these events. And one journalist the other day asked me, why were people so enraged to go to these rallies? And I said, actually, they weren't enraged. They weren't angry. They're in pain. And what they were looking for when they came to my events was not for someone to repeat back to them all the things that were hurting them, but to give them hope that things could actually get better. And so the most common comment that I received at my events was, you actually give us hope that we can change things and restore the Canada that either brought us here as immigrants or that we grew up with as Canadians. So that really is what my candidacy was about. It's about hope. It's about giving people back control of their lives. That's not something to be angry about. It's something to be hopeful for.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of those things you talked about a lot was housing.
Yeah.
And a key part of your housing policy would be to withhold federal funding from local governments if they didn't speed up building permits or reduce associated costs.
Yes.
But what's to stop investors who have an obvious capital advantage over first-time home buyers from simply gobbling up that supply? How does your government address the demand side?
Well, first of all, let's talk about why we have a demand side problem, and it was a central bank problem. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at my column in the National Post, where I reprinted the Bank of Canada's graph on mortgages by home buyer type. And from the time the Bank of Canada started its money printing orgy in spring of 2020 until about 6 months ago, investors had increased the number of mortgages they had taken out by 100%. Now, why? Well, obviously because the central bank was buying up $400 billion worth of bonds, which injects enormous cash into the financial system, which is lent out principally to those who have more credit history or connections to the financial system, and that is the investor class. And that was what drove the excessive demand in our real estate over the last year. So thank God the quantitative easing money printing program is done. I hope that we're going back to a normal free market in mortgage credit because that will hopefully remove the enormous distortion that has caused the problem of the last several years. When I'm Prime Minister, we'll have sound money. The central bank will have one job, and that's to keep inflation at 2%, with an eye not just to CPI inflation, but asset price inflation. That's how we're going to stabilize demand for assets like housing. And then on the flip side, you did mention supply, so if you don't mind, I'll just jump onto that as well. I do believe, that we all agree that in Canada, the supply problem is not because of the market, it's because of government. Local and provincial governments that block housing construction make us among one of the slowest places on planet Earth to get a building permit. That means that no matter how much money rushes into the market, there's not enough supply to keep up. And in Vancouver, $650,000 of the price of a new unit of housing is government. Delays, charges, fees, etc. And so I'm going to say to the big city gatekeepers, you want more infrastructure money, you've got to get out of the way, lower the cost, increase the speed of building permits so that we can add millions of new homes. I'm also going to sell off 15% of the 37,000 federal buildings to convert those into housing so we have more supply there as well.
Mm-hmm. And so a lot of politicians, when they talk about affordable housing, they support it, but then you ask, do prices need to decrease in order for housing to become affordable? Do you think that housing needs to correct to become affordable?
Well, look, that's the market that's going to decide ultimately. They're already going down. Actually, we're kind of in the worst nightmare combination, right? Prices are going down, costs are going up. The price of the house is dropping because rates are rising, but for the same reason, the monthly payment is becoming more expensive. So the buyer, it's not a buyer's market and it's not a seller's market. Everyone is losing. And what I think is happening is that as the central bank reverses its outrageous policies from the last 2 years, it is popping the bubble that it created. And both buyer and seller are losing as a result. I expect that prices will, whether we want them to or not, continue to come down as rates continue to go up. But we've got to make sure that we get more supply onto the market so that our next generation can afford them.
Now, as prices come down, is there ever a point in which you'd bail out homeowners?
Well, look, I don't want to speculate on that. I think that government intervention is what caused the problem in the first place. And but we're going to have to wait and see. We don't yet know the full consequences of this radical experiment that Trudeau sent the central bank on, right? There was this enormous buildup in debt and housing prices as the money flooded into the economy. Now that they're pulling back that money and the rates are rising, I just can't see how we avoid, unfortunately, bankruptcies and repossessions, because people who bought variable rate mortgages with adjustable monthly payments at 2.5% or lower, actually it was down to 1.6% at one point for variables, they're now paying 3 or 4 or 5. I can't see how we're not going to have major defaults. So I'm watching very carefully to see what we can do to mitigate the pain. But unfortunately, this is the nightmare economy that our Prime Minister has created.
Mm-hmm. And so the Trudeau government just announced a big new immigration target,
right.
500,000 new immigrants a year, and that doesn't include student permits or foreign workers, temporary foreign workers. Do you think that sort of high target is in line with achieving affordable housing, or even things like access to healthcare? Okay, well, first of all, I would say immigrants are not the problem in the housing market. We have more land in Canada where there's no one than we have land where there's anyone. We have the most, I think, the 4th most per capita acreage of land on planet Earth. So it's not like we're Singapore or Hong Kong where we're just running out of places to put people. We have lots of space. The problem is the government gatekeepers that prevent us from building things. As for healthcare, well, we're going to need immigrants in the medical professions, as nurses and doctors. The problem, again, is the gatekeepers who prevent them from getting licensed to work when they get here. So I'm going to work to, I know that that's a provincial issue, but immigration is a shared responsibility. I'm going to work to sign foreign credentials deals with the provinces where I'm going to incentivize them to commit to 60-day credentialing. So within 60 days of an immigrant applying to work in their field, they should get a yes or no based on their tested ability. I'm going to back up small study loans for immigrants who need to take time off their jobs to study up to the Canadian standards so that they can pole vault into their profession and get higher wages and service our economy, including in our hospitals. And I'm going to work with the professional licensing bodies to create modules so that future immigrants who've applied to come here can begin credentialing before they even arrive. So that's one way we can not only supply our medical system with more professionals, but also supply our housing market with more tradespeople and our economy with more skilled workers, get them credentialed, get them to work. So would you keep these types of high targets or increase them?
Look, I think that immigration levels should be determined by both demand in Canada for immigrants and demand by immigrants to come here. So, for example, I think we should have an employer-driven economic immigration program whereby employers who have advertised jobs and can't find locals to take them can quickly sponsor people on work permits to come here who then can quickly become permanent residents and citizens. And that should really determine our economic immigration. Central planning doesn't work in the economy, it doesn't work in immigration either. In the 90s, when the Liberals tried to centrally plan which kinds of skill sets we would bring in through immigration, they ended up bringing in a lot of very educated people, but whose skills were not in high demand in the market economy. And that's why a lot of very intelligent people, very well-educated people, ended up being underemployed in Canada at the time. What we should do is let the employers who are in desperate need of the workforce determine who they need and make it quick and easy for them to bring law-abiding, hard-working, skilled workers to our country. Then on refugees, the second stream, we should allow private sponsorship by charities, nonprofits, community groups to determine how many refugees we bring, because we know that private sponsorship is the most successful form of refugee resettlement. It ensures that the immigrant has a support network to get them language training, an apartment, a resume written, schooling for their kids. And so let's allow private sponsorship to drive numbers in that area. And then family reunification should be driven largely by the families that are here that are able to support bringing loved ones here. My emphasis would be bringing young spouses. So I meet countless young people who are 30 years old, have a spouse in India or China who's actually skilled and could be working in our economy, but the two are separated. And we need to speed up spousal reunification. So I'm not trying to dodge your answer about numbers. I just think that we need to, the system should be based less on arbitrary numerical targets and more on the demands of the Canadian economy, Canadian charities, Canadian families, and the immigrants who want to come here.
Mm-hmm. Shifting gears a little bit to taxes, you want to cut income and payroll taxes because you say they can hurt workers and they can punish productivity.
Yeah.
But preferential tax treatment for certain non-productive assets like housing can have the same effect. Would you ever consider shifting the tax burden to certain assets in order to offer workers an even greater tax cut?
I don't intend to raise taxes on anybody. And I think that, I believe that primary residences should be exempt from capital gains tax. I think Trudeau would love, if he ever got a majority, he would slap a capital gains tax on primary residences, no questions asked. I would never do that. Rather, I don't think we need to raise this tax in order to cut that tax. I think we need to control the cost of government. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem in Canada. Spending is 30% higher today than it was in the pre-pandemic year of 2019. Even though supposedly all these pandemic programs are lapsing, why is our government a third more expensive? Well, it's because we have an irresponsible prime minister who can't control himself. And all of those costs are being passed on in higher debt, taxes, and inflation. I would bring in a pay-as-you-go law that requires the government find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending, so we can cap the cost of government while the economy and the taxpayer catches up. And that's how I would free up dollars for tax relief.
Would you consider an alternative like matching the principal residence exemption with a significant tax credit for renters?
I'd have to look at that. I'd have to learn more about it. I'm open to ideas that help renters because obviously they deserve a fair shake as well.
Yeah. So a lot of young Canadians are very open to your messages on affordability and housing, but young Canadians historically don't vote Conservative. And honestly, I think a lot of Conservatives had given up on young Canadians over the past few decades. So first, how do you get young Canadians to seriously consider voting Conservative in the next election? And on the flip side of that, how do you get Conservatives to buy into fighting for young people's votes, especially when some of their interests might be at odds with other generations?
That's a good question. So I think that there is an interesting, I think the reason I've been so resonant with young voters, particularly in my leadership race, it goes back to human nature. When we're young, we're interested in freedom. We want to go backpacking, we want to be able to go to nightclubs and gyms, and we want to get jobs and adventure and take risks and have fun, all things that were banned during COVID. And I stood up for freedom against all of that. And a lot of young people who felt they were suppressed in their ability to enjoy the freedom that Canada is known for, saw hope in my candidacy. Now COVID hopefully we're moving beyond that, so what keeps them interested? Well, I think opportunity. They're at the point in their lives where they want to climb the ladder, but the ladder's being pulled up, right? So that you've got all these young people reaching for the ladder, they can't even grab onto the bottom step because house prices have gone so high, and that's why they're, the famous and legendary 35-year-old still living in mom's basement is struggling. And I think we need to do as Conservatives is offer a bottom-up free enterprise economy that gives anyone willing to work hard the chance to climb the ladder and achieve their dreams. The other thing that's misunderstood about young people is I think the left, what they're really saying is vote for us and you can be a kid forever. You don't ever have to get a job or work. We'll just send CERB checks for forever. Actually, young people don't want that. They want the sense of achievement. It is in our DNA to want to work hard and achieve something with our lives. Our young people want jobs. They want their paychecks to buy them a rewarding life. They want to start families. All things that the current big government, top-down economy of Justin Trudeau are depriving them of. And that contrast is going to win me the support of young people and help me win government.
Yeah. What about the flip side of that question? How do you get Conservatives to buy into fighting for young people's votes?
I don't think it's a hard sell because everything I just said is fundamentally conservative, right? We believe in big citizens and small government. That's what I've been fighting for my whole life. And I think that because of the circumstances of the last several years, that has become extremely popular with a lot of young people in a way that it wasn't. So really, I ran in this leadership race and I brought in all these people that didn't typically vote Conservative, but I didn't really change anything I ever stood for. It's the same thing I've been saying in the House of Commons for 17 years. So I don't see my agenda being at cross purposes with traditional Conservatives. It's really doubling down.
Mm-hmm. And do you think an important part of getting more young people to vote Conservative is having more young people run as Conservatives in the next election?
I think so. It's hard to say, but I think it is good to have a good mix. I think the House of Commons should look like Canada. Like I was elected when I was 25. I don't think it would have been good if everyone in the House of Commons was 25, but there are 25-year-olds in the country paying taxes, fighting in the military, who deserve to have someone their own age in the chamber. And so I think we do have to have a good mix of ages, and I'm going to make sure I have that in my delegation of candidates.
So if there's an opportunity before the next election for the incumbent nomination rules to be changed, would you support open nominations?
Yeah,
that could bring in more fresh faces.
Generally speaking, I support open nominations. We're kind of in a delay position right now. It's a holding pattern because the boundaries are being redone. So it's very hard to nominate people for ridings that don't actually exist. But generally, my view is that we should have open nominations, and we have strong incumbents, but we also need to bring in, and in the non-held ridings, we also need open nominations, not just handouts of nomination tickets to favored friends.
Mm-hmm. It's dominating the news right now, so I'm going to ask, what's your position on Ontario's use of the notwithstanding clause to force workers back to work? Well,
listen, I find it's a tough issue because I think these support workers do phenomenal work. I have a little girl who with special needs who relies on them, and they do an incredible job taking care of our kids. Trudeau's economy has hammered working class people with inflation. I hope that they can come to some sort of a amicable solution, the government and these workers, because we need them and we need our schools open, and I hope that they can resolve it.
Do you think that provinces resorting to the notwithstanding clause more often, and also with movements in provinces looking for more sovereignty, are we headed towards an inevitable constitutional crisis?
I hope not, because I don't think that opening the Constitution is going to solve anything. It will lead to months or years of bickering, and you don't open the Constitution to solve one problem, because as soon as it's open, everybody wants in. And you're going to have every single interest group, every province, every territory diving in to get their change that they've always dreamed of. In the end, like we saw it with Meech and Charlottetown, none of the changes actually happened, and we spent a lot of time fighting about it. I'd rather get back to the focus on restoring the purchasing power of people's paychecks, because that's what's going to improve their lives.
Final question. As things stand right now between the Liberals and the NDP, the next election would be in 2025. Do you think there's anything you could do to trigger an election before that date?
Well, Jagmeet Singh will decide that. He's the one who signed on to this costly coalition with the Liberals. So he will have to decide whether he continues to prop up the Liberals as Canadians. In a country where 1.5 million people are going to the food bank in 1 month, where 1/5 of the country is skipping meals because they can't afford food, where the share of your paycheck it takes to own the average home is higher than at any time in Canadian history, You know, where a country where students are living in homeless shelters, is that the NDP paradise that we were promised? Because at some point, Jagmeet Singh is going to have to take responsibility for the government he's propping up. He can't have it both ways. He can't claim that he is a critic of the government while he's keeping it in place. So, frankly, I think he's in an irreconcilable position in supporting this costly coalition, and he will ultimately have to decide whether he continues in that position.
Okay. Well, thank you again for the time today.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.